cushioning it a little bit.
Oh, Simon, right.
What's that?
Rosh Chodesh Simon.
Right. Okay, good evening. How appropriate it is that we're having this class tonight, because tonight is the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And there was a prayer written by the Shloach HaKadosh, one of the great Jewish thinkers, mystic, someone who brought out the Pnimius HaTorah, the depth, the inner understanding of the Torah. And he wrote a tefillah, he wrote a prayer to be said tonight, or just before tonight. So I'll pass it out, and afterwards tonight, you could, afterwards we'll get out. And so it's appropriate that we're working on child rearing tonight. A happy recap from last week, just a few of the ideas. Number one, by way of introduction, we discussed the idea that Avram Avinu was loved by God. It says in the pasuk that Avram Avinu was loved by God specifically because he gave over his tradition, he gave over his teaching, his understanding, he gave it over to his children. All the great things that Avram Avinu did, Abraham did, that's the thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Ki Adativ, I love him because of that. Also mentioned, David HaMelech says in Psalms that the person who works at child rearing is the Yedid Hashem, he's the beloved of God. We noted that there are 5 aspects to the making of a person, go into building the person's personality. And just very briefly to review them. Number 1, there's nature. Person's born with different DNA. Each person is born different DNA. He has a different spiritual makeup. And therefore, each person needs their own, I guess you call it IEP. Did I say it correctly this time? Yes. IEP. Because indeed, everyone is different. 2 children coming out of the same womb, growing up in the same house. Many of us have seen that they could be incredibly different, how these could be brother and sister. And in the same vein, we believe that each child is God's gift to humanity. As frustrating as children can be sometimes, they are God's gift to humanity. That'll be another class, but sometimes the most frustrating ones are the incredible gifts, because there's a lot which they have under the hood, unusual qualities that they have under the hood. Maybe they don't conform so easily. And it's important for people who have more than one child to appreciate that each of them is God's gift to humanity. Second area in the development of a person is the chinuch, or as we're going to learn tonight, the hashpah, the influence that we have and our surrogates, school, camps, have on children. That's what we're focusing on in these classes. The third ingredient is the environment. The environment is incredible. We have to see to it. The environment is such that it reinforces that which we're teaching at home, and when it doesn't, and the truth is today, it really can't. There's no way that the environment which we find ourselves in reinforce our beliefs, our values. So we have to see how we're going to deal with that, because our values are not the values out there in the world, and as sheltered as we try to have our children, the environment is not going to be strengthening that which we're teaching at home. We have to learn how to deal with it. The fourth aspect of the development, of course, is tefillah. We went into this a little bit last week. Nothing on this earth develops without prayer. The first days of creation, the psukim is very clear from the verses that the vegetation was ready to sprout forth, but it wasn't going to sprout forth, as Rashi points out, until there was man to be mispalel for it, to pray for it. Nothing develops without prayer. And therefore, that's one of the major things that we as parents need to do on a regular basis for our children. And the fifth ingredient is something that is not in our control whatsoever. It's the only thing that's not in our control whatsoever. A person can be the most fantastic parent in the world, can have the most fantastic environment, the most fantastic grandparents. It could be wonderful. The bottom line is, we believe that every single person on this planet has free choice. And therefore, we might make them a wonderful bed to lay in. But sometimes they just don't, and they won't. And quite frankly, it just may not be our fault. I mentioned last week that yours truly is a big proponent of much of what's going to happen with a child is the parents. And I believe that more strongly than ever. I used to believe it when I was a teenager, and I believe it much more now. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, people make choices. You can have a person with the most wonderful, emotional, and spiritual life circumstance. They make their own choices. Okay, let's begin for today. This is pretty amazing. What we're about to do now, because of the following fact. In my house, back in Scranton, Pennsylvania, my parents were really not into decorating the house much. I don't remember any paintings or anything on the walls. There might have been, there probably were, but I don't really remember anything. My parents really weren't into that. But there was one thing hanging on the kitchen wall. And I would often, as a child, I would look at it, I would read it, year after year, time after time, I would read it. And that one thing that was hanging on the wall, I think, made a fantastic impression on me, an incredible impression on me. And that was this poem. It's a very famous poem. You probably know it, but it's worth reading again and going over. That's going to be the basic topic for our discussion tonight. Children learn what they live. This is written by Dorothy Law Knoll back in 1972, as you see on the bottom. This says so much. Children learn what they live. If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to be guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, she learns to be confident. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. I'm quite confident that the one hanging on my wall did not switch over to she. That is a modern adaptation of this poem. If a child lives with fairness, she learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. If a child lives with approval, she learns to like herself. If a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to find love in the world. Indeed, children learn what they live. And much of what they live, much of their experience is their parents. And much of that experience is not necessarily directed at them. It's what they witness. It's what their parents model. These last 2 points, A, that the experience, much of the experience is parents, and B, that it's not necessarily what the parents say directly to the child, but rather it's what they witness, the behavior of their parents. This was brought out in 2 amazing quotes, stories from Yaakov Kamenetsky. Yaakov Kamenetsky, one of the great Gedolim of the last generation, he was probably one of the wisest men to ever grace these shores. In his day, there were several great sages, but as far as advice, as far as wisdom, he was seen to be something very unusual, something very special. The first little story that took place at a Philadelphia yeshiva dinner. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky's son, Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky, Yibod Lo L'chaim Tovim Aruchim, one of the great sages of our day today, has been the dean of that yeshiva since, I believe, the late 50s. Founder of the yeshiva, or maybe came soon after the yeshiva was started. The greatest of the greats, this Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky. So one year at the yeshiva dinner, Rabbi Yaakov, the father, was a guest speaker. Well, he got up to give his speech, and he says, I'm very sorry, but the idea of a yeshiva dinner is to praise the yeshiva. It's a fundraiser. And therefore, speaker after speaker gets up and says, we have such a wonderful yeshiva. And they do. Wonderful yeshiva. It's one of the premier yeshivas. We have such a wonderful yeshiva. Look at our graduates. Our yeshiva is obviously so wonderful. So Rabbi Yaakov said, I'm very sorry to tell everyone, rain on everyone's parade, but if this yeshiva has good graduates, that means one thing, that they have good parents. So if you want to stand here and celebrate the parents of these children, these graduates of the high school, that's fine. But do me a favor, yeshiva. He's talking to his son's yeshiva or any school. Don't take too much pride in the graduates, because it's the parents should be taking the pride. The parents have the ultimate and deepest and most basic influence on the child. Well, what do you do with that? Here you are at a dinner celebrating the yeshiva. Well, the son, Reb Shmuel, the son, got up shortly thereafter and said, I can't argue with my father, but at least we could say that we didn't mess these children up. When I heard this story, I was so happy, because I always struggled at yeshiva dinners. Not to knock the yeshiva, not to knock the school. Yeshivas are very important, schools are very important. They impart the education and to further develop the child. But please, don't take the credit of the parents. It's the parents are the essential credit. I was very happy to hear that Rabbi Kamenetsky said that. So the parents, children learn what they live. Much of what they live is the parents. Yes? Educators are the surrogates. It's the school that we find for the children. They are a shliach. They're an emissary of the parents. The parents have been there since day one. The parents will, God willing, well outlive the influence of the yeshiva. It's the parents that have the primary role here. That's the first thing. First bit of wisdom from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. The second thing that he said was that when we speak of chinuch habanim, we speak of education of the children, we really shouldn't call it chinuch habanim. They call it chinuch. Chinuch means education, class. He says, don't call it chinuch. Call it hashpa'ah. Call it influence. He says the word hashpa'ah, influence, is cognate, or maybe directly related to the word shipua, which means a slant. He says the way parents influence their children, the way parents are mechanech their children, is like a roof, which is slanted. What they do, what they say, parents, it just runs off and it runs down to the children. It's not necessarily the direct teaching to the child. This is what I'm telling you. It just comes to mind, very often. It's the slanted teaching. It's the secondary teaching that often trumps the primary teaching. Kid spills a drink at the table. That happens sometimes. Kids speak. The father gets all upset. Didn't I tell you to put the drink in the middle of the table? Why do you always leave it at the end? Well, okay. So he's trying to teach his kid, A, listen to me. B, Why do you leave it at the end of the table? That's the primary teaching. That's direct teaching. That's the chinuch of it. But what's the hashpah teaching? His father got all exercised about a spilled drink. Well, the next day something else comes along. Something serious. The father doesn't get so upset. Something real. The father doesn't get so upset. What does the child learn? The child learns that a spilled drink, no problem, you can keep it at the end of the table. A spilled drink is more important. He gets more emotional about it. It's more important than somebody passing away, and then somebody getting hurt in the community, somebody getting sick. He's all upset about that. He's all emotional about that. The influence comes not so much from the chinuch, not so much from the direct teaching, because probably that lesson will be lost. Probably the next day it'll be back on the table, because that's no way to teach somebody anything. Scream at him for something like that, he's not going to hear it. He's not going to hear it. Most of the time, and we're going to get more to this, most of the time you scream at a 5-year-old, you scream at a 4-year-old, his brain gets fried. His brain gets fried. He doesn't hear except my father, my father, my tati, my abba is incredibly upset with me. And he won't even know what happened probably. Very, very possibly. But he learned that kind of thing, a nonsense, is something you get upset about. And then, even worse, when his father does get upset about certain things, so then it won't even mean anything to him. It's about as important as a spilled glass of seltzer. And therefore, because child rearing is about the unintended lessons, influence of the parent. So then child rearing, most importantly, is about developing oneself. That's why we called this topic, this series, Raising Your Children by Elevating Yourself. It's so much about it is about the mother and the father, who they are, and the lessons that they're imparting just by what they're doing. The Rav Shimon Schwab, he pointed to a beautiful example of this in Shimshon Agiba, the great Samson, the mighty Samson. Well, an angel came to Samson's mother and told him, you're going to have this special son. It's a good example because every child is special. You're going to have this special son. And he's going to be a Nazir. So he can't have wine. He can't cut his hair. All right, he's going to have this special Nazirite vow. Well, she goes, mother of Shimshon, and goes tells her father Manoach. And Manoach says, really? He says, tell me. I have to go find out. What should we do for this boy? What should we do for this child? So he addresses this question. This question is addressed to a malach. This question is addressed to an angel. And the angel responds, Kol asher amarti el ha'isha ta'aseh. Whatever I said to the woman, whatever I said to your wife, go ahead and do that. Whatever I said to your wife, make sure you go ahead and do that. The commentaries are wondering, what's his question? She was already told how the child should be treated. He's going to be a Nazir. So do what a Nazir does. Make sure you don't give him wine. Make sure you don't cut his hair, etc. So what was the Manoach? What was he asking? What should we do with this child? He was already told by his wife. And then the answer seems to be ridiculous. Whatever I said to your wife, that's what you should do. That's what the angel says. Rav Shimon Schwab says so beautifully. His question was, I have a child that's going to be a Nazir. I'm not a Nazir. He's going to grow up in a house. I'm going to say no wine, and he's sitting there drinking wine. What we can have a contemporary example of this, right? One day the father sees the son. He stole some scotch from the cabinet. 10-year-old, he's experimenting. Children do that. He steals some scotch from the cabinet. Ooh, the father flies off into rage. You can't do that. 10-year-old drinking. Gives his son a whole speech. Well, why is he drinking? He's drinking scotch because his father in shul, throughout the entire shacharis, all he could do was talk about scotch. And the kiddush, ooh, this scotch and that scotch, and has a peaty taste, and this, ooh, you have the smell, and so the kid's standing there watching his father with the grown men standing for 15 minutes speaking about scotch, and how important scotch is, how you get together with your friends, 15 minutes at a kiddush, all you talk about is scotch. So what does the kid want? So he's screaming at his kid about the scotch. So Manoach says, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm not a Nazir. So how am I going to raise a child who's a Nazir? He's not supposed to come in contact with the dead. He's not supposed to cut his hair. I got this great haircut. I just went and got this great haircut. He's going to see me get the great haircut. Right? He's going to see me drinking wine. So what am I going to do? So what does the Malach answer? Says Rav Shimon Schwab. He says, whatever I told your wife, you do. Because if your son's going to be a Nazir, you better be a Nazir. And even if you're not a Nazir, even if you don't have the halacha, the law of a Nazir, you better play the part. Because if you want your son to do that, that's what you have to do. It's about the parent. It's about the parent. If we want them to be kind, if we want them to be truthful, if we want them to be calm, I'm trying to think of things that I need to talk to myself about. We need to be calm. So that's what we need. That's what we need to be. If we want them to be that. Rav Shamshul Hirsch gives a very clear, practical example of this. Very general example. Parents often want to discipline their children. They want to discipline their children, and they want their children to be disciplined. Right? Why are you doing that? How many times did I tell you that's not good for you? Okay. So Rav Shamshul Hirsch says that's pretty easy to say, don't do that. Don't eat between meals. You're about to have supper. I mean, I would assume pretty much almost everyone in this room said that at one time. You're about to have supper, right? So have some discipline. When we discipline, we ask people to have discipline. Says Rabbi Hirsch, well, if we ask a child, we want the child to be disciplined, we need to have discipline. We absolutely need to have discipline, because the child's looking at the parent. Next week, he's in the cupboard half an hour before supper, etc., etc., etc. I think discipline is a great example because it cuts through almost everything in our life. Discipline is such an important quality, that we do things in its time, in its place, when it's necessary, and not do things just because we're in the mood or we have a certain proclivity, we have a certain need. Says Rabbi Hirsch, if we want to discipline, we need to show discipline. I came across some incredible makoros, incredible sources this week that I'd like to work into this particular class. We've been speaking in shul a lot about an ayin tova, or other people like to correct me to say an ayin tova, having a good eye, to be positive. I saw one source who says that, excuse me 1 second. One source who says that perhaps ayin tova, just being positive is one of the most critical qualities that we could have. He says that often people who are not positive and find their life circumstance to be difficult and unappealing, they spend their life battling against everything that they have. He says, when a person does that, that is like a black hole for one's personality. That destroys somebody's personality. A person who's accepting, this is what it is. This is the situation I have. This doesn't mean that somebody can't want to better their situation. That is a natural human trait to want to better one's situation. It's a very important trait. I once heard Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg said that someone who doesn't want to better their lot is dead. You know, people say, Ezehu, who usher hasameach bechelko, the famous line from Pirkei Avos, who is a wealthy person? So it says hasameach bechelko. So he said people mistranslate that to mean someone who is satisfied with their lot. So he said someone who's satisfied with their lot is dead. He's like not living. Who's satisfied with their lot? A human being wants better. He wants more. And that's a very positive thing. To always want to better yourself. Now, better yourself in what? Well, if I have one car and I need the better model, right? So that's wanting something more. That person's alive, but his head is directed at something which is really not something very important. This midah, this character trait of always wanting more, which a person being alive, should be something which is spiritual. I want to grow. I want to get better. I want to be like I was yesterday. So when I'm talking about being positive about what one has, I don't mean to say positive about the particular spiritual station that I am, but I have a certain life circumstance. This is what it is. This is the cards that I was dealt. I have a certain type of intellect. I have a certain type of emotion. I have certain parents. I have certain siblings. I have certain family members. This is what it is. I'm not going to change that, unless sometimes possibly you can change it, but that's another question. But most things, this is what I'm given. I have a socioeconomic status. This is who I am. This is where it's at. So says this author, if I accept it, then I have the ability to develop. I have the ability to grow. But if I'm warring against it, if it's always no good, I'm always upset by it, I'm always finding it unappealing, then I booby trap my life. And I was thinking, when it comes to a family, how critically important this is. The head of a family, a father, a mother, positivity. Where there's a house filled with positivity, with goodness. Everything flows from that. The second amazing source is about Ayin Tova is that not only do I see the positive, and therefore I can accentuate it, therefore I can bring it out, therefore I can develop in all sorts of things. I see the positive in myself. Just for example, my intellect, my emotions, what interests me, as opposed to what somebody else's intellect, somebody else's emotions. But besides that, one of the great Gera Rebbes says that Ayin Tova is the flip side of Ayin Hara. We're all scared of an evil eye, or with people, the lens that people go to in order not to cast an evil eye, or not to have an evil eye cast against us, Oh, we have all sorts of things. We wear red bendels. We have Svardic, those Kabbalistic hands, all these things. And very practically, there are halachos, there are laws that we shouldn't bring upon ourselves an evil eye, because we believe there's a certain power there, there's a certain spiritual force. I was just learning in our Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class last week, you don't have two family members, close family members, get on Aliyah up to the Torah. People do different things, you know. I'm one of 5 brothers, so my father would say we would go to shul. My father would say, you know something, guys, don't sit together. Don't sit together. You know, sit separately in shul. Don't sit together. You know, you don't need people looking at you. That's what he would say. You don't need people looking at you. Where does that come from? It comes from the brothers of Yosef. The brothers of Yosef. One of the approaches why they came down to Mitzrayim. One of the approaches why they came down to Mitzrayim separately is 10 big strapping boys, right? The Shiftei Kah, they were very special people. They probably had a shining countenance to it besides, and they should be together. Let them split up. We don't want to cause an ayin hara. Said the Gerer Rebbe, how much more so when it comes to an ayin tova, because we have a Gemara that tells us that mida tova meruba, that the good spiritual forces are much better than the bad. And therefore, it actually has a spiritual effect when a person looks positively on something. You see something, instead of looking with a jealous eye, a negative eye, looking to rip something apart or tear something down, you look positively. Look at those 2 brothers. Look at that. Wow, look at that. Look at that guy's house. Oh, he's got a beautiful house. I hope he enjoys it. Instead of saying, he should, he should crash his new Lexus. You say, he's got look at that Lexus. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, he should enjoy it. I hope he enjoys every. That develops, as the Gerer Rebbe, a positive force and puts positivity into the world. Positive spiritual force. So again, I was thinking, when it comes to a family, a father, a mother, they speak positively. They talk positively. Their responses, their interactions are with positivity. The children grow up in an environment of positive looking, instead of looking at the negative, of looking at the positive. It has an amazing, incredible effect. It's got to have an incredible effect on the children. From this, we segue into, which could be argued, into the most important midah, a quality out there. And this might, to several of you, it might sound very unlikely, but probably the most important midah that a human being can have is the midah of happiness. It's a very difficult one. To be happy. The Tiferes Yisrael, one of the great commentaries on the Mishnah, he says in at least 2 places on his commentary of Pirkei Avos, he says the natural state, emotional state of a Jew needs to be happiness. It's a big chiddush. It's very novel. It is. I think if you go into most study halls and ask scholarly people and say, what should be the natural emotional state of the Jew, I think you might hear some people say seriousness. You got to be serious. Life's very serious. Says Tiferes Yisrael that is exactly wrong. That is wrong. And he brings a proof. He says there's a Mishnah that says that when somebody goes to pray, he should pray mitoch koved rosh. His prayer should be with the serious frame of mind. So therefore, he says, specifically, you move from an emotional sense of happiness to seriousness when you go pray. But otherwise, it has to be happiness. As a matter of fact, he says it, the Tiferes Yisrael, he says it on the Mishnah, where the 5 great students, they went out to find out what was the most important essential trait that a Jew has to have. And the first one said, ayin tova, a good eye. Says Tiferes, what's ayin tova? It's just being happy comes from looking at everything positive. And says this particular Tana that from Ayin Tova, from happiness, everything else comes from. Actually, the last opinion there is Leif Tov. And the Tiferes Yisrael said that also means happiness, but it means a more ingrained happiness. Whoa, this is very difficult. I once gave a class about Simcha. And I saw there was a wonderful person there in tears. And I couldn't imagine what the tears were. Why tears? Why tears? And I thought I might have offended this person with something I said in the middle. So I went over a few days later and I asked, did I offend you? So what was said was no. But I don't want to say he, she, but what was said was, it's a real struggle to be happy. And I said to myself, whoa, yeah, it is. There are a lot of things in the world that are upsetting. There are a lot of things that throw us off our game of happiness. Life is challenging. And how incredibly important it is to always get back to somehow work on being happy. I once gave this talk in shul, and afterwards a fellow came up to me. It was a last-minute decision to speak about happiness that night. I had something else planned, but somebody came and I didn't want to speak about that thing, so I spoke about happiness. As this guy's walking up to me, I say to myself, Chaim, that was the most ridiculous topic. This fellow just lost his wife of 50 years 2 months ago. And here, this guy gets up there and says, you ought to be happy. I said, this guy's going to read me my rights. He is going to wipe the floor with me. So he says, could we step aside? I said, sure. Lowering my head, waiting to get whacked. He says to me, it's incredible that you spoke about happiness tonight. Incredible. He said, I need help. Can you help me? I'm having a real issue because, my wife passed away 2 months ago, and I'm trying to tell myself certain things to get back to happiness. That was my theme, getting back to happiness. I've been telling myself certain things. I don't have enough ammunition. Can you give me some more ammunition? Brilliant. How important. We need to talk to ourselves. We need to answer ourselves. We need to explain to ourselves. We need to get back to happy. I gave this talk at another venue. It was at a Sheva Brachas. Guy comes over to me and he says, I cannot believe you spoke about happiness tonight. Oh, why? He says, I just lost my job. I can't tell you how broken I am. Just lost my job. And on the way over here, I was speaking to my wife. And I said to her, honey, this is not going to break me. But boy, this is hard. I need your help. He said to his wife, I need your help. You have to help me to battle through this. I'm not going to lose myself, who I am, just because of this. Happiness, it's really difficult, very difficult, like that first person said. It's a challenge. Life is filled with major challenges, disappointments, tragedies. It's filled with them. I mean, and there's a choice to it. I happened to hear news today, a very dear friend of mine, very ill. Very ill. That was at about 6 o'clock. I wanted to cancel this class. I wanted to cancel this class. And I said to myself, no, no, you can't do that. People come to the class, go to pieces. What's that going to help anyone? That going to help anyone? Go give your class. Not going to help anyone. life has there are a lot of challenges. And we need, like the second fellow said, we need to arm ourselves with ideas and self-talk in order to get over these things. And number three, sometimes we need help. There's all sorts of help. There are good therapists out there. Sometimes it's a spouse. Sometimes it's a parent. Sometimes it's a child. Sometimes we just need help. We need support to be with other people. But in a family, we display, we model for our children, and for that matter for others, we model how we can get back to happy, how we deal with things, that doesn't mean, of course there's mourning, of course there's time for crying, there's time for all these things, of course, but ultimately to get back, to move back to this. And this is something that we have the great responsibility, the greatest of responsibility, to model for our children. And getting back to the first point, you can't go to a child and say, be happy. You need to be happy. But when our children witness us, how we deal with things, how we help a spouse get through things, how we help other people, do we get angry? Do we fall into a depression? How do we deal with these things? So this is something we model for our children, and it is, I think, one of the most important aspects of what we model for our children. So just a quick review. Children will learn what they live. Most of the time, much of that is from parents. It's not necessarily what we tell them. It's what they witness. They witness our behavior. They witness our responses. I think it's worthwhile to remember that story from Yaakov Kamenetsky of his assessment of the impact of home versus the school, and also his idea of that it's not direct teaching, it's not chinuch, at least not for the parent. It's not so much the chinuch, the direct teaching we have, but the shipua, what's inclined, what runs off, and we teach the child that way. And then these particular ideas of some of the things with which we influence our children. One, the idea of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch of discipline. How disciplined we are will have a direct impact on how the discipline of the children, whether we're able to discipline the children, whether the children will ultimately be disciplined. Second, the second thing that we model, that we talked about, is positivity. The Chovos HaLevavos is very famous Chovos HaLevavos. I just saw Rabbeinu Yonah, commentary on Pirkei Avos, says the same thing. So it must be from an earlier source. But it's a little example, but it's such an amazing example. Say the story. There's two people walking along the road, and they saw the carcass of an animal. And one of them said, "Oh, dead body. Oh, that's so horrible. Oh." The other one said, "You know something? Look at that. Look at those are incredible teeth that animal has." I always thought that's like such a, to myself, it's Rabbeinu Yonah, it's the Chovos HaLevavos. I always say to myself, that's such a funny example. Couldn't give a better example, but it's a great example. Because you need to be looking for something. The positive person looks for something which is positive. And then, probably, which is one of the most important midos that we need to work towards, and this is something which is really modeled in a family, and that is happiness. Centrality of happiness, how we need to work to happiness, help each other have happiness, have arguments for self-talk of how we need to reframe things, see things a little differently. This is something that we model. I think we'll call it an evening. I would very much like, if you have any particular areas you'd like to get into, I very much like your responses or your requests. It would give me some direction. The first two classes were very general, and I'll tell you why. I think when it comes, especially to raising children, it's more about the generalities. It's the overall principles. Why? Well, Rabbi Yaakov, I saw in this very nice book by Noah Orlowik. See, he says, again, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said, why isn't there in the Code of Jewish Law a chapter on child raising? Should be a chapter on child raising, point by point. So he says, Yaakov Kamenetsky says, because it can't be. Because it's too differentiated. It's too different. Because everyone's so different. You can't have a point by point bullet. You can't do it. And therefore, when we learn the general principles, I shouldn't say even learn, when we review the general principles, so then it's something that each of us will have to be able to apply. I saw in Rav Chaim Volozhin, listen to this, if I could take another minute. There's a Mishnah, the second chapter of Pirkei Avos, that says, Marba Eitza, with a lot of counsel, with a lot of advice, Marba Tvuna, there'll be a lot of understanding. That's what the Mishnah says. Oh, so the Mishnah is counseling, get a lot of advice. Get a lot of advice, you'll have deep understanding. So he starts out his piece of commentary by saying, Margala Bapume de Inchi. This is a adage which people say, Sha'al Eitza va'asei kisich lecha. Sounds so strange. Sha'al Eitza, ask advice, va'asei kisich lecha, and then go do like your seicha. Now, Reb Chaim Volozhin is quoting this. Obviously, he says that this adage, there's some wisdom to it. It sounds bizarre. Go ahead, take advice, and then go do what you want. Right? So very often people do that, right? Ask advice, and they go do what they want. What does this mean? So he says like this. He says, one person can't possibly have all the information. You can't. However, if we have a particular topic and we go around the table, everyone here in this room is going to be able to add some wisdom to the point. That's why, when we have classes, we have classes in the shul, we have very interactive classes. And I walk out of there like, whoa, I thought I knew this subject. Now I really know the subject. Because he added a point, and he added a point, and he added a point, and then we go around like, wow, this is great. Right? Not one person can't be the repository of all wisdom. So therefore, marbe chachma, the more wisdom, marbe eitza, right? There is, marbe eitza, marbe tavuna. The more counsel, the more understanding. However, at the end of the day, says Reb Chaim Volozhin, tell me if this is not a chiddush, nobody knows my situation more than me. Nobody
knows your child more than
and nobody knows your child more than you. Nobody knows my situation. Nobody knows my family situation more than me. So I might not be the sharpest tool in the kit. I might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm me, and I know my situation. So therefore, Margale b'puma de inchi. It's a very wise aphorism. Sha'al eitza. Ask as many people as possible. Go out and seek, get the wisdom. But then, ultimately, you need to make the decision on your own. The first time I heard this, I was at a rabbinical convention, and one of the premier rabbinic personalities in America was giving a session, and at one point, he was talking about a particular issue, and he stopped, and he said, I want you to know something, my friends. I'm giving you the rough outline. I'm giving you the ideas. He says, you go back to your community, and you apply it. It's the first time I ever heard that concept. He says, I can't tell you, I might be the towering rabbinic figure, which he is. He didn't say those words, I'm saying it. I might be the towering rabbinic figure, but I can't tell you what's going to work in your community. I'm telling you the parameters of the halacha. I'm telling you the parameters of Jewish thought. Now you go and apply it. It's the exact same thing over here. So that's why we're dealing with generalities. We'll talk about some specifics. I really want to get into criticism. I want to get into several of these, the hot issues when it comes to child rearing. But the general idea, I think, like we can go home today. The idea, one of the major take-homes for me today was, when you're dealing with a child, don't think that the major message that you're getting across is the one that you're saying. Very probably will not be what you're saying. It's how you're saying it. It's what you're talking about. It's the emotion you're putting into it, etc. So that's a broad concept. It's not a detail of how do you deal with my 4-year-old hit his brother. How do I respond? Like I think a lot of parenting classes are. This is more of a general thing, and therefore, we close today's session by saying that marba eitza, marba tevuna, with greater understanding. Now, asek sechlecha, you do like your wisdom, make the right choices. Okay, thank you. Any questions for now? Anything? Okay, again, I invite emails or phone calls. If you'd like anything covered, please. Thank you so much.